I'm Mocha Mazel, and this is Manifesting and Healing for Black People. How did this channel podcast come about? Well, I've been on a healing journey for a long time. I want to say maybe since 2015, 2016. I have been trying to get to a point and phase of finding myself and becoming the vision that I actually saw for myself. At the time when I initially started, I didn't know, what was wrong. I didn't know what the issue was. I just knew something wasn't right, and this was not what I had set out for myself at that current phase of life I was in. So since then, I've been on a healing journey. I want to say I've made great strides. I made great process, and now I want to say that I'm kind of more into like a manifesting phase. But of course, healing and manifesting and growth is an ever long, ever happening process. So I don't want to say that I've completely, um, healed everything, but I've definitely I recognize things now. I see things for what they are, and I don't take a negative or frustrating approach in most cases with the phase that I'm in currently. So this is how this came about. So in 2015, again, I was going through the motions. I had got married. I had started, kind of working and quote unquote getting into like a career. Um, and growing up and hearing all these things and how, get married, getting a good job, all of this stuff is supposed to make your life so much better. You're supposed to be so much happier, and that literally was not the case for me. But again, at the time, I was just going through the motions. Um, so when that consciousness started to happen, when I started to kind of like tap into that awareness, I guess I started working on myself. I wanted more for myself. Um, I started going on a weight loss journey. I started losing weight. I realized that this, relationship was not what I thought it was. Again, I didn't have much to go off on for healthy relationships at the time. But I knew this wasn't it. I tried to, stick it out because, that's what we're told to do: stick it out, deal with it. Um, but I realized it was not it wasn't it. And again, at the time, I didn't know what it was supposed to be, but I knew that this wasn't it. So 2017, 2018, again, I started feeling myself. I started losing weight. I started to get more in the mind frame. I started to get into more like spiritual practices. I was trying to tap inside and trying to see, and again, trying to find this version that I knew existed, but I was not quite there yet, nor did I know how to get there. So again, this has been a journey, but I tapped in, um, separated from my husband, started losing weight, moved back home, and again, I was in the process of trying to start over. And when you do that, even when starting over, you can still find yourself going through the motions again. So I started that. I was like, let me go to what I'm familiar with. Let me go to these, jobs and careers that I've been able to obtain in the past. Let me go through that phase, right? So I'm doing that. Around this time, I think it's 2018, 2019 or so. Time is blurry. 2018, 2019 or so, I moved back home, um, started working in whatever I could get, um, and COVID happened, Corona happened. So at the time COVID came and coronavirus hit, I was at Tennessee at the time. I was a substitute teacher, and I wanted to sub. I wanted to be a substitute because I wanted to earn income, but I also didn't want to I wanted something that I could do on my time when I felt like doing it and when I was ready to do it, because I was going through the motions, but at the same time, I wanted to give myself the opportunity to figure things out. So I didn't want anything too that required a lot out of me. I guess if I could put it like that, I wanted to put some time in myself and figure out what it is that I wanted to do. So I was subbing in Tennessee, um, and I also was going through the process of trying to learn how to earn income online. So I started teaching English online at the same time. Again, that was something I could do when I, felt like it. I didn't have to physically go anywhere. And I think that was the process I was also trying to get to. How do I earn income? Because I hated working. I think most of us hate working, but I hated working. Like, I hated going somewhere, spending a large amount of time doing things I really wasn't interested in doing, that did not bring me joy and happiness. It was solely for the purpose of earning money, making money. That's the phase. That's where, things started churning for me, even though I didn't recognize it at the time. I was like, this is how I'm going to start creating some type of freedom for myself, because I think that's ultimately what I desired, was freedom. But how? Because we live in this system of capitalism, how can I do this without being homeless and without starving, and all of those other factors that come into it? So yeah, so Corona was the blessing in disguise for me. All right, so Corona happened. I started making income online. Luckily, that was my saving grace through, the whole Corona period. That was when I knew, I was like, okay, this is manageable. I can earn a living online. I don't physically have to be anywhere. I can do this. This is it for me. Like, this is it. I ain't never going back, right? So I want to say maybe like a year or so before, I had went on a trip. It was my first vacation style type trip. So I went to Mexico. I think it was Los Cabos, and that freedom again that I kind of experienced on this trip. And I don't even think it was necessarily like the desire to be on like a constant vacation. I was like, why should this be something that I only experience, for short bits and amount of time? Like, why can I feel, this level of, freedom on a regular basis, on a reoccurring basis? So at that time, again, I wasn't really into manifesting. I was just starting to learn about it, but I was tapping into myself and, realizing my areas for growth. So I made an Instagram post, and I was like, it was a reflection at the end of the year. And, I said, these are some of the changes that I've made. This is some of the growth that I've done. And at the end of that post, I said, I want to be, I'm putting this in the air that I want to work remotely and live on an island. And yeah, so yeah, I look back at that now and it's so crazy. And that's where I am. I literally work remote and I live on an island. And I will get into that. So again, when Corona came, that was it for me. I was like, I know I probably never will be going back to like the traditional workforce work setting thing. I was like, I'm making money online. It's not a whole lot. Literally, it was like, the beginning phases for me. It was part-time work. I think I was making maybe like $20 an hour online. Again, which for me was saving grace at the time. But again, that allowed me to see, figure out what the options and the possibilities were. So, of course, with my background, I had always toyed with the idea of living outside of the country. Never really put any plans or anything into motion. I always wonder what would it be to like not live in America? Like, what would it be to not exist within this space? So I started feeling myself again. I was like, you know what? I make money online. if I go somewhere, at least I won't be, I'll be able to support myself. The job that I was working, I could work from anywhere. I didn't have any stipulations or anything, like that in regards to my movement around the world. So I was like, this is my opportunity. I was like, this is my opportunity to see what it's like living outside of America. So I started, where would I go? Where would I go? Of course, Africa was first in my mind. I'm a Pan-African person. I love my folks. I went to school for it. I studied Pan-Africanism. So it was always something in the back of my brain. And then of course, studying these things, you get to learn about all the isms and all this stuff that exists, and all the trauma that has been encapsulated into Black folks. And I took that as an opportunity to start mapping out my escape plan. So I toyed with the idea of Africa, because of course, I'm like, Africa would be ideal. It's what the origins are. I would get to learn so much, and it was ideal. And then I started to think about the cost of getting to Africa. It's expensive getting back and forth there. My people are there, but there's still like a lot of cultural differences and dynamics that I would have to overcome. And I was like, starting off, I don't know if that would be the best choice. I was thinking that it would be a lot to chew. As somebody who was my first time like living outside of the country. Again, I had went to vacation in Mexico, and I had also visited Jamaica with some classmates a few years prior. And again, I wasn't on vacation. That was more of like a cultural immersion type thing. I was coming to see, and visit. So those were my two experiences outside of the U.S. So I started, to look at Africa, and I was like, I don't know if that's realistic for me at the time. Of course I would love to visit, go there, spend some time there, but I was like, as my first time venturing out into these waters, I don't know if that's the best thing to do. So I started looking at Mexico, and I was like, Mexico is close by. I could probably get to and from there easily, but I'm not fluent in Spanish. And I also know there's like a lot of, people there that I'm trying to get away from. I was like, I think I would be, put myself in the same predicament. And it didn't make sense. So I started looking at where could I go that was, mostly populated with melanated folks like myself. There wasn't too many barriers, too many cultural differences. There wasn't, too many things that would make it extremely difficult, but, I would still have the opportunity to learn and grow from. So the Caribbean, I'm looking, and, again, I said I had visited Jamaica prior. I was kind of familiar. I, enjoyed the experience there. Let me check out Jamaica. So I started, researching, how to go about, living in Jamaica. Again, at the time, you don't know what to look for. And I had kind of got set on it. Like, I was like, I'm going to Jamaica. It makes the most sense for me. Like, it's predominantly Black. They're English speaking, along with patois. It's not too culturally different. I grew up in the South. It's not too, like, outside of the language and some of like a few like cultural things. I was like, this is probably like my safest bet, the best bet for me. And that's what happened. So I got on doing research, and I looked into some Facebook groups, and I asked them, I don't recall which one. It was a Black group, one of those Black expat groups. And I said, is anybody in Jamaica? And this one lone soldier stood up. She was like, I'm here. And so she was like, yeah, you can message me and all this other stuff. So I talked to her. We instantly clicked. It was like she understood where I was coming from. She had, she was from California, but had been living in Jamaica for over 10 years at the time. And she extended, her place to me. And again, for a lot of people, that's like, you move to a country living with somebody you don't know. It was it's not like, initially you would probably be like, hold up, hold up, hold up. But I could just kind of do in my spirit, this was like, this needed to happen. So that was literally how that happened. So I connected with her, reached out to her, and we started making plans. I want to say probably like within a month's time, like I was ready to go. That's how that happened. So I work remotely and I live on an island now. I live in Jamaica. I up and moved to Jamaica. Um, as soon as Jamaica opened the borders back up from Corona, I skedaddled. I got on the plane. So again, it was within a month's time that happened. I made the move. So I was still in the process of divorcing my husband. It was like at the final stages, all the paperwork, all of the stuff had been done, submitted. Luckily, we didn't have any property together. We didn't have any kids. Thank goodness I was able to kind of make somewhat of a clean break. But we were still divorcing, and it was kind of like just wrapping up the final communication portions at that time, with the court system and stuff like that. So when I came out here, I had been separated for over like a year. It was nothing to salvage. Again, it was just one of those, you don't know what you know. I didn't know any better at the time. I was just wanting for it to be done. So with that, I was not too crazy to kind of get back in the dating scene. And that was my buffer initially. That was my buffer at first. I was just divorced. Really wasn't trying to hop into anything. But of course, I knew at some point I would have to. Well, not have to. I would want to, start that process. So I learned. I took some time to learn. I took some time to kind of, get some experience and just start interacting. And I knew there were like some intercultural things that I would have to. I came in with the knowing that it was going to be a learning experience. I wasn't expecting anything to kind of just like be boom, happen instantaneously, or anything like that. But I came in with the mind frame, let me get myself set up first, let me get myself situated. How do I go about legally staying in Jamaica? How do I go through the process of immigrating here? Because when I got there, I knew that I knew this was home for me. I was like, I don't want to go nowhere else. I'm here. I'm where I'm supposed to be. I don't need to go nowhere else. Jamaica was it for me. I was like, I want to be here. How do I go about doing that? So I went through those processes. And luckily, again, it was Corona time. So I had nothing but time to learn and figure out and immerse myself, into Jamaica, actually kind of like experience it. I had never visited Jamaica as a tourist. So, and I'm kind of glad I didn't, because I got so much more insight and experience, experience Jamaica outside of like the microcosm of tourism. So I want to say probably like, that first year I was dating, I would go out, I would meet men, and, learning about experiencing, Jamaica now. A lot of the stuff, like I was in, I don't want to say I was in shock, but I was like taken aback, a lot of the times, because I was like, what is this? Some of the things that I would encounter, stuff would just happen so fast, and I'm not accustomed to that. And so I had to like take a step back from like a lot of the encounters that I had, because maybe it was the fear of the unknown, maybe it was the not understanding why things are happening like this. But again, I wasn't in a particular rush, but I would, I was like, I took it as a learning phase as well. I'm like, all right, I'm learning. This is, I'm learning the processes and the formulas, and I'm getting into it, and you know, so and not to again this kind, like I said, I was going through healing processes and journeys of my own, and so at that time, at that point, I started to realize that a lot of the things and behaviors that we encounter, um, there's a reason for it. A lot of the things that I would, you know, encounter, I would, you know, recognize like some patterns, right? So I'm like, there's something like psychologically happening. Like people who carry on a particular way, you know, that's destructive and, you know, not conducive to themselves or anyone else. There's like some psychological reasoning behind that. So, you know, at some point I stopped getting frustrated and I stopped getting mad. And I was like, I need to learn more. I need to, you know, I will get more experience still, but I also need to understand like what is the structure and the setup, you know, in this particular place where I live as to why, you know, people and men are finding it necessary to function in this particular way. So that led me on another healing growth journey. And again, you know, I've learned that I heal others through healing myself, right? So I stopped getting mad, I stopped getting frustrated. And I was like, what is this? What is this triggering, you know, within me? Again, you know, I was learning about healthy relationship dynamics after, you know, I divorced my husband. I was like, why didn't I know any better? Like what was missing from, you know, my upbringing that, you know, made me even go through that process in the first place. I didn't know how to properly vet. I didn't know how to I didn't know what, you know, positive traits and stuff to look for. You know, where I'm from, the thing is, oh, you know, you get married, that's good. Like you just get married and that's it. But luckily for me, something in my spirit was just like, no, this ain't it, right? So, you know, again, not to harbor negative emotions and things like that. I wanted to learn, like, how can I prevent this the next time going around? So I started, you know, consuming content. I started reading more. And some things made sense, some things didn't. But what I did collect and what resonated with me most, that's what I kept, that's what I retained, and that's what I started implementing, you know, in my different encounters with people. So again, this aided my own growth process, right? And a lot of it was out of frustration. You know, I can say I wasn't frustrated, but I would get frustrated, but I would realize like this frustration isn't accomplishing anything. Why did I have that interaction? Why am I frustrated? You know, how can I look at things from a different perspective without getting frustrated, even though I may be getting triggered and I have a reason to be frustrated? At the end of the day, what does that solve? It creates like this protective barrier. It creates like, you know, you closing up. But I was like, I didn't want that. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel natural. It doesn't feel healthy. How do I get to a place where I can love and still be in control and empower myself to where it's not put me in a disempowered position or a disempowered place? So with this new logic, with this new information, and again, this allows you to look at people for, you know, for not what they're doing, but like they're, you know, looking at them for, you know, why are they doing this? Why are they functioning like this? And again, not to become like a therapist or again to like internalize their problems, but you get to look at it from a position to where it's, you see them for who they are, not what their, you know, behaviors are showing, if that makes sense. Like, of course, that's a part of who they are, but getting into like the actual person, into the actual human of that, like again, there's a reason and they may be functioning a particular way. So like I said, I had started, you know, getting back, I want to say probably like a year into being in Jamaica. I had been dating and things like that, but nothing that really spanned into anything So I would start to know with that, that allowed me to recognize patterns and some of the behavior mechanisms and things like that. And with the ones that I did, decide to kind of like delve deeper in, I would notice that at some point, something would kick in. It's like them being under the impression that you're emotionally invested, and they can then start the little tricks and the games and things like that. And so again, luckily for me, like I will always take a step back and um, take some time and some distance from that person. Maybe I decided they were worth communicating with. Not want to say worth it, but I had the capacity to continue communicating with them, or I didn't. But at the same time, I would be sure to communicate, like, what the problem is, what the issue is. Some would be able to process it and understand what I was saying, some wouldn't. And then, that just kind of, again, I'm not putting myself in a position to take on a burden, but I can still recognize what you're doing, not get mad and frustrated at it, and move accordingly. It made things so much more easier understanding it from that perspective. So I did come across an individual that we really hit it off. We really connected well. I was like, this probably has the potential to be like the type of relationship dynamic that I would aim for or that I would want. But at some point, again, I had that encounter. I had to say, this is not functioning healthily. I'm gonna have to take a step back from you. I didn't say it that at the time. I did say I was very much cussing. I was cussing folks out, and I was trying. That came from a point of frustration. That wasn't my typical, interactions with them. But I did get triggered by something that they did. And again, that time, emotions and stuff had begun to develop, and you start to get invested. And, again, I was able to recognize it. But I did get mad at the time. I got frustrated. I cussed them out. I called them all this, that, and the other. Like I said, I was still a work in progress, still working on myself. But I had to take a step back, and I had to go, through my processes. And, again, not let it consume me, but acknowledge it, realize it, and take a step back. Didn't know what to do with it at the time, but that was my reaction, right? I got mad, I got frustrated. I didn't want it to consume me any longer, and so I stopped dealing with him at the time. So yeah, that happened, and I decided to take a break. I was like, you know what? This is an opportunity for me to focus on myself. This is an opportunity, again, for growth. Even though, you mad, you pissed off, at some point you get in the habit of like, how do I get past this in a healthy manner? Like, that's how I had to, train myself. And with the different encounters and stuff, I had to do it so where it would not consume me, and I would, I felt my feelings. Like, I'm not gonna, I let my feelings process. I let that flow. But I was, recognizing these are the patterns that would get me into a better position, into a better place. So I'll feel the feelings, and then I started to, again, put that energy and focus back into myself. I started taking some online courses because I wanted to, I was working online, but I had, started business ventures online. I wanted to learn more about systems and processes, marketing and stuff like that. So I was like, let me put some time and attention into that. Took some online courses, got a few professional certificates. Took a trip, went out the country, went back to Mexico. I went home for a while. It was a holiday season. My niece had come to visit me in Jamaica, so I had ended up taking her, spent some time with her, took her back home. Then I went to, Mexico, San Miguel. This was over a span of like, I want to say about 6 months. Span of 6 months, I took that time. It was hard. But again, now I'm in such a much better place and position. Right? My businesses are, they're not, they haven't skyrocketed, but I see the steps happening. that trip I took was so beautiful. I had this amazing photo shoot. Like all these spam things happening when I, let those emotions process. I put that energy back into myself, and again, now I see things from a different perspective. Right, a period of 6 months. All right, this occurred. So recently, a few weeks ago, I reconnected with this man. And of course, I'm pretty sure that he had a growth process and he had some things that he had to acknowledge about himself. Um, right? So, thinking about it and hearing myself say these things now, it is like where I was at the time. And I'm like, yeah, you literally heal people by healing yourself. Whether or not like it's direct or indirect, when you put good healing energy into yourself, it resonates. It permeates through, areas you don't even know, right? You heal people through healing yourself, even if it's through small microcosm steps. Like that's what happened, right? I reconnected with this man. And, we started, back having conversations, and he let me know that he was dealing with anxiety and depression. It had been clinically diagnosed. And I don't think he understood at the time. He wanted to let me know, like, that he was dealing with these things. And that's likely, he's starting to come into awareness with his own behaviors, right? So he wanted to share that with me, even though it was, not something that was super, super direct. After he got more comfortable and he started to, realize, like, I guess not wanting to repeat the same mistakes. Let me know this. He had been diagnosed with anxiety and depression, and of course, like, I was empathetic, and again, I had started doing I had to go through my own healing phases, and not that I said that I could, I was completely I didn't understand at the time exactly, what it was. I was familiar with it, and I had primarily associated anxiety with like panic attacks and anxiety attacks and things like this, like the adventure of things happening. That's what I associated with. But I did know, things like that typically stem from experiences, right? And trauma and stuff like that we store in our bodies. How did I know this? Because I had to go through those phases of healing my own traumas and wounds and not hiding from them, confronting them, and, going through the steps to make myself better. So I was able to kind of relate to him in that way, even in my experience with him, but not letting it consume me and putting that energy into myself. The things that, I knew would be good and beneficial for me in the long run, and that would bring me some type of happiness. He told me this, right? Shared this. And again, I tried to give him some, steps and things that he could do mentally that I feel. I was trying to do my best because honestly, I have not been clinically diagnosed with anxiety or depression. Again, I was familiar with the term, didn't really know what it was. And I was just, trying to be empathetic as I could with him at the time. So, yeah, me not wanting to be, overbearing, I would check in, make sure he's okay. I know things like that take time, so I wasn't like, necessarily pressing for a relationship or, trying to figure out, what are we doing? I would much rather you be, a healed version or moving towards a healed version of yourself before we even go down that route. But I would still, check in with him, make sure he's okay, and recently we was having a conversation and he started exhibiting some of those behaviors again. And at this point, I'm sick of it because I'm like, I done told you what you needed to do. You know what you needed to do. And that's what I was, I was getting triggered again, and I was getting mad and frustrated because I'm like, why are you doing the same thing over and over again? Like, I'm like, why, and to me, I'm like, why you don't want, to be free of this? Why you don't want to, work towards this? Why you don't want to, I put some blame on him because I'm like, at this point, you making the choice and the decision, which I'm not saying that there's no truth in that, but I wasn't being super empathetic at the time, or I wasn't being, like, I got triggered and I got frustrated, and I was like, I'm sick of you. I'm sick of you. I'm sick of your, I was feeling like you want to stay. You know how some people get comfortable and they like want to stay there. And I'm like, you're seeing that this isn't conducive to yourself. You're seeing like, like I started fussing, and, I was like, why are you like this? And yeah, I was trying to catch myself at the time. So I did take a step back, and, but at the same time, I was like, it's time for you to get past this. Like, it's like I see him going in like a circle, because again now I recognize like what's happening. Like, you want to escape this circle, this spiral, but you just keep. I'm like, when are you gonna decide that enough is enough, right? But I said it in a not so way that I'm saying now. But at the time I was like, this is becoming nonsensical. It's becoming insanity. Like, you keep doing the same. Like, stop. That's like literally what I said. Stop. And so, like, I know, that was probably insensitive at the time. And not to say that didn't need to happen, but that led me to want to actually understand what was going on. Because, like I said, he told me he had been clinically diagnosed with anxiety and depression, and I was like, okay, I know what here, do this, do that. And I know stuff is easier said than done, right? But I was coming from my, what I thought was my healed or higher version self. And so the next day I was like, let me take a step back, actually research and look into what this is. Because I'm like, this is a pattern, like, at this point. And like I said, I had stopped. People with those type of patterns, or people who function a particular way, there's some psychological stuff going on. And again, that's not to be like put labels on them or anything like that, but I'm like, there's something happening that you're not recognizing to be able to stop this, and so that you can be free of this and go live, be happy, whatever, do whatever it is that you want to do. So that's what I was like, let me do this. Like, let me learn more so I can be more of a support, because that's what I'm thinking. That's what you probably need more than anything, right? That's why you keep doing these same behaviors over and over again. You don't have the support system in place to help you deal with this. Like, you've been diagnosed with it, yeah, but now what? So I started researching anxiety and depression, and I'm at the point to where it's like, how do you heal it? Like, that's where I went. I was like, how do you heal this mess? How do you get rid of it? That's what I started doing, right? And so I was like, what is this? Let me learn more. How do you get rid of this mess? How do you get rid of this ish? So I came across, I went to YouTube. I try and find like the more sound minds and the people who are like actually speaking from these things from like a both experience, but also like doctor, somebody who was invested researching and learning and understanding what things actually are. So I came across this video by Mel Robbins, okay? The Truth About Anxiety and How to Heal It, the Mel Robbins podcast. And this podcast made stuff so much easier to understand. Like, my mind was blown. This literally was like the thing. And of course, like, I sent it to him. I don't know if he watched it yet, because again, we got tit for tat. I sent it to him. I was like, I think this will help you. It seems very informative. And after watching it, I told him, like, I understand you so much better now. Like, I again, it just opened my world up because again, I was familiar with anxiety. I was empathetic to it, being something that he was clinically diagnosed with. But I didn't understand like what it was, why he's functioning this particular way. I just, thought it was something that deal with, and then I, was under the thought that you would want to take the time to figure out how to process it, right? Or process it on your own. But I don't think, he had got to that particular phase yet. He's just, I have it. This is what I'm dealing with. But I'm like, okay, well, now it's time to move on from this, right? Because, anyway, these patterns. So, I'm listening to this podcast. And I had watched a few other videos. But the Mel Robbins podcast just really broke it down so much. And she had, the guest was I think he's a neuroscientist, Dr. Russell Kennedy. He deals with anxiety, and he was on there, and again, stuff just made so much more sense. This video broke things down to a T. All of the behaviors he had been exhibiting. I don't want to say some. A lot of the behaviors that he had been exhibiting. A lot of the stuff that he would do, say, it literally like would come up in this podcast, and I was like, "That's what that is. That's what this is." And that accompanied with like the actual neuroscience behind it as to why that's happening. I was like, "That's it. That's it." Like, and I told you, I was like, I got the cure. I know how to fix this. So I want to say that, I was doing it with the intention to like help him get past it and to help him deal with it. But I'm watching the video, I'm like, this is a lot of stuff that I was dealing with as well. But these are the steps that I took. And so now I'm able to look at this, perspective and see like some of these things that I was dealing with also, a lot of it just boils down to experiences that we have encompassed in our childhood, whether we remember it or not. A lot of it is stored trauma or repression in the body. I have been, looking into books called The Body Keeps the Score, and how, again, trauma like resurfaces. Things that we don't deal with or things that we don't acknowledge. And for some of us, we don't know what that is. We just do not recognize it, right? So, again, it made it make so much more sense. And it made stuff make sense for me too. So, I'm saying that with me getting frustrated, but having the awareness to actually take a step back and look and see why I'm getting frustrated, and coming across this podcast and this video, it put me again in another state of, I guess I would want to call it a higher being, or it put me at another level of consciousness, where had I not, had I stayed frustrated at him and mad at him, and not took it upon myself to actually see and actually analyze this from like the psychological perspective, I would have never gotten here. I would have never gotten to a point where I can like get on, make this video, and see what was going on. And so, in return, like, I'm kind of grateful. And again, I don't have to sit mad and frustrated. I put that anger and frustration into actually seeing, like, what is this? What's going on? And this is what I came across. And it made stuff make sense on his behalf and my behalf. Like, I was looking at some of the stuff that they were talking about. I'm like, that's what I dealt with. That was, my experience. Like, I have, like, I have, like, a mother wound to an extent. I had, like, I probably did have some levels of anxiety that stemmed from that. I'm better now because I recognize, I came into the awareness that something was wrong, or that I wasn't functioning to where I knew I could be. And I took those, steps like, all these years ago. But again, now this kind of like brings things like full circle and it made, it just makes things make sense all around. And so I, collected the information, sent it to him, give him some time to, deal, process it, watch it, give him his time to go through those phases. So with that, I want to bring this back here into this channel because, again, with some of the, work and some of the education and some of the information that I've collected, a lot of these behaviors and things go undealt with. And I don't even want to say, diagnosed. Some, if we want to put those terms on it, diagnosed, or they go undealt with for a lot of black people in the black community. And this is, not even, this is outside of America, right? This is here where I am in Jamaica. This is probably here, in the UK. It's probably in here with Canada. Anywhere black people that have accumulated, trauma like the way that we have. Black people have accumulated a lot of trauma, a lot of generational trauma, a lot of things that just not have been dealt with internally, right? How do these things show up in us, right? And this is one example with us, right? This is one thing. Why, what traumas, what experiences, what life things, have happened to where he had to repress that, and he thinking that he's repressing. And we have that whole machismo will be a man thing, which has its place, right? But where did it fall off to where he was not able to tap in, right, and actually address those issues, and now it's showing up in the form of, anxiety and depression? Like, what are the missing and connecting dots? So yeah, I'm bringing it back to how this shows up in black people and the purpose, and why I wanted to create this channel. So just to give some historical context, right, with the black people and our experience with slavery and whiteness and these systems and all of this stuff, right? Trauma induced from the beginning, like since the beginning, since our interactions and dealings. And did trauma occur prior to then? Yes, but with us having like this concentrated experience, trauma induced from the beginning, and it has created so many ripple effects, so many other things to deal with as a result of this, right? So black people not getting their needs met, not only not being able to meet their needs, but not being able to access tools, whether they wanted to or not, to cope with their needs not being met. So many ways I see this showing up with us and our experiences. So I'm going to, again, I will link this video, and Dr. Russell Kennedy, all right, is a doctor that's speaking in this video. And what he's talking about is where anxiety starts, right? And so anxiety in black people, and not just anxiety, all the other things that you could deal with, starts with the body. Starts with the body, and results in, it comes into our thoughts. So historically, black people have never had the opportunity to rest. Black people have, during, certain periods of time, endured physical violence. Never had the opportunity to rest, never was able to process, all of those things, just workhorse, trauma. Of course, that's going to show up in the body. Of course, that's going to have generational effects, right? As we've seen, and as most of us have come to learn, like a lot of the stuff that we dealt with, with black, is generational. It has something negatively. The things that we dealt with have had some type of like generational tie to it. Um, and again, like that, once you start to learn these things, that makes so much more sense. Like, my parents' needs weren't being met. What did that then result in? Even though they wanted to try to do their best, we develop these wounds and we pass them off to our kids because somewhere along the way the cycle didn't stop. It didn't get halted. The awareness wasn't brought in, right? Until like now, more recently, we're starting to do that. But traditionally, that's what has happened. We've established these abusive households because of, again, abuse that we've endured that hasn't been checked. We have developed all these different kind of dynamics that have just not healthily contributed to us in a larger sense. And so we've stored this trauma in our bodies. We've, projected them onto, other people. We have created these coping mechanisms. We see a lot of like coping mechanisms in our communities, smoking, drinking, hypersexuality, all of these things to deal with what has not been acknowledged. And again, you may not necessarily understand, right? You don't know what's going on. You're just going through the motions, or you're going what you see other people doing, how they're coping, how they go about living life, until at some point you come to some realization or some waking up, or some intervention has to happen for a lot of people, for them to take upon those processes for themselves. And one coping mechanism we see that I think is still being kind of like is people using people as a coping mechanism or a tool. And these toxic relationships come about because instead of going and doing, personal work and working on themselves, they use other people as coping mechanisms to make them feel better, to make them, some form of validation. And that's where now, like, I'm coming to, like, full circle wise, right? These are coping mechanisms. Toxic relationships, so people don't want to leave each other alone. And they know it's not healthy. They know it's not a good dynamic, but I get this quick form of adrenaline, or I get this quick release, or I get this quick something that I can, helps me cope in the moment, or gives me some type of dopamine in the moment. And you never actually get to a phase where you can actually, recognize within yourself what's happening, and be able to take the steps to become like a fully healthy, functioning person that could be in a healthy relationship dynamic. Same thing with alcohol, same thing with weed, is you have these different vices to cope. And, of course, this can happen with anybody. Like, we see, this across the board. But, again, specifically speaking with Black people in our history, this is why these things are so reoccurring, and why we can't seem to, just do away with some things completely. Like, that's literally what it is. And again, watching this video and looking at it in a bigger sense of things, it just makes things make so much more sense, right? It's literally cycles and cycles of things repeating that we have not, had the resources to deal with, or the coping tools and mechanisms to deal with in a healthy manner. So that's why I say you heal people when you heal yourself. Had I not had that encounter, with him, and had I not took it upon myself to be like, let me see, something is happening here. This is a pattern, right? This just, connected so many dots for me. And again, like, I was familiar with anxiety. I was familiar with depression. I'm pretty I don't really think I've spoken about my depression much, but you know, I went through a depression phase, and high functioning depression, you are depressed, but you're just functioning because that's what we have been conditioned to do. Me recognizing that, you know, I'm doing all the things, I'm taking all the steps, but I'm still, you know, I'm not happy. Like, I had that awareness to, you know, make that change. What about the next person who was just going through the motions, right? But you know, they know they're not happy. They know internally they're not satisfied. Yet they just, I'm just supposed to keep going and quit, you know, keep functioning. And what, you know, Corona, you know, has done, the pandemic, they had no choice but to, you know, all those coping mechanisms, all those, you know, needs for validation that they may have been getting from their work or, you know, their relationships. So many things just came to a head. And even, you know, with me, luckily I had started doing the work prior, and I used that as my opportunity to, you know, actually see what it is that I want out of life and to go about those steps and processes in doing so. And, you know, me realizing that I didn't want that lifestyle that America was offering me. I didn't necessarily believe it. Never made sense to me. But again, you just doing it for the sake of, that's what you're supposed to do. Never made sense to me. Me, you know, taking that opportunity to move to Jamaica, actually reset, to get my nervous system in check. I think that's, you know, I'm trying to find a word. I'm pretty sure he mentions it in the video. Reset your nervous system, or regulate my nervous system. You know, able to tap into things that trigger me or make me upset or make me get into this high emotional state to where it takes so long to come down from. Now I can get confronted with something, and like that, I'm like, oh, I know what this is. I recognize what this is. I don't have to get worked up about this. This is, you know, stemming from this, that, and the other. This is it's such an amazing feeling to, you know, just look at it from that perspective, not get worked up about things, not again create another cycle, you know, because that's so easy to do. We just, you know, circle, and be, this is what this is. This is how we can fix this, you know, acknowledge it, and then also here's the solution. And the solution is, for a lot of us, is to acknowledge those wounds that we have accumulated, you know, and that's hurtful and it's painful for a lot of people. So again, they repress it. That's their way of dealing with it, but it shows up in other ways, right? You know, even with me and for him, he's repressing it, not knowing that, you know, we're just under the idea that that's what we're supposed to do, but it shows up in other ways, whether we, you know, confront it initially or not. It's going to present itself. So, you know, it's do I have all the answers? No, but I think that's a hell of a stepping, you know, stone to, you know, for us to start, you know, and we're starting to do that work, starting to see, you know, this is where this stems from, this is where this stems from. But how do you make it full circle in a manner to where you're not creating a cycle? Because a lot of us, we come to the awareness, right, and then we just stay there, we stay stuck. He came to the awareness that he had depression and anxiety, and then that was it. He said, I have depression and anxiety. That's it. Like, now we need to start having those conversations of how do we move beyond that? How do we get past that? How do we, you know, how do we get to healthy functioning phases, and we can put those things, like, we don't carry those into next generations. We don't carry that into our life moving forward. So this is the conclusion that I've come to, right? And again, to have, you know, retain that power within myself and be able to direct him to the proper resources, that's going to create a change within him. That's going to create a ripple effect for the people around him. And, you know, that's how we do this. That's how we do this. And so I think the important thing is is to not approach things from a point of being like disempowered. Like, it was easy for me to go to that place and get mad and get frustrated and cuss, right? That was the easy thing. But then to go and look and actually, be presented with the opportunity to actually see how these things have, come about within myself, and actually recognize those patterns and behaviors. And a lot of people, right? A lot of us are typically just walking around with these traumas and wounds, don't know how to deal with or how to process them. And when we do, we get bombarded with so much that it becomes overwhelming, and it just like, you don't know what's what. So that had led me on a path to do this. And yeah, now I'm in a grateful position, because now I understand things better for myself and for him, and for my parents, and my family and my friends. Like, again, mind blowing. So yeah, I will be linking this video because I definitely do want people to watch it if you're dealing with anxiety and it's clinically diagnosed. Even if it's not, and you if you come into some awareness that I have this reoccurring issue, take the steps to heal those. And become aware of those alarms in our body. When he started acting like that, it created an alarm in my body. I started blah, 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 that created an alarm. It probably wasn't so much as a panic attack as maybe he had started to deal with, but it created something in me. But again, I was like, let me deal with this now, because I don't want to remain festered in this state. And so again, I came across this, and yeah, it just makes things make so much more sense. And when you know better, you do better. And I have no reason to carry anger, hate, and frustration, because I know where that's stemming from, and I can deal with it in the proper way and direct people to the proper resources, and myself included. Yeah, so a lot of times, we run from emotions, we run from those things that set off our alarms. And that's what happened with me. Those emotions came up and I felt personally attacked. But now, again, like that, with that awareness that I have now, it's, and some could say this is like the essence of manifesting, right? Because the quicker you are able to realize that things are happening through you and not to you, and like circumstances really don't matter, you're able to look at it from the perspective of, this person is just reacting out of motions, or they are reacting out of patterns, or they are reacting out of their needs not being met at one particular time, and this is why they are behaving in such a way. Like, that's when you start to not let your nervous system get all out of whack. You don't get you get in more of like a peace state, more like an aligned state, and you attract things to you, because again, you're not in this constant shamble. You're not an emotional wreck all the time. You're gonna have your moments like I did, but again, now with that awareness, I was like, okay. And even now, more so with consuming this information, I'm like, oh, that's what this is. Like, and I'm like, you good, you finna be on your way to healing. Like, that's how I was able to do that. And that's it. I think that's the key. And I think once Black people, like we've been doing, the work is happening. But I definitely think that once we start to actually tap in and do it from a place of not letting it consume us, that's when we are going to start seeing the the overhauling of a lot of things, overhauling of a lot of toxic dynamics that we deal with, the overhauling of a lot of stuff that we tolerate. You know, I think that's going to be, the key to us healing, taking back our power and taking back our control over our lives, and heal us as a community. And also, I realized that like constantly fighting oppression, constantly fighting, white people, whiteness, it keeps you consumed with whiteness. It keeps you consumed. It keeps you in this constant state of rage. It keeps you in this constant state of frustration where we could, begin the processes of taking back our power mentally, physically, and emotionally, and not let these people constantly consume and keep us invested in this ish show of a place. Wow, what would be the beauty of that? What would be the future of our kids? Little black kids growing up. What would be the future, the relationship dynamics that we have with black women and men? What would be the future that if we were to not get consumed with whiteness? A lot of our actions and behaviors are a direct reflection of whiteness and trying to live in it and trying to sustain it, trying to maintain it, trying to be it. Right? What does it look like for us? What does that look like for me? Had I not up and moved to Jamaica, I probably would have never come to that realization. I have no desire to aspire to a career now. Like I want to be comfortable, yes, but I'm not interested in climbing these folks' ladders. I'm not interested in, having people around me for the sake of being around me because I'm lonely and I don't know how to be by myself and I don't know how to cope with my thoughts and stuff like that. I have no desire for that because like I have come into my, myself in full form. And once you do that, you don't have those codependencies. Like again, the U.S. is a codependency for a lot of us. I get a lot of people saying, I'm not going to leave the U.S. because I'm like, whatever. You have this false sense of security, right? And that's why when a lot of us have false senses of security, when we have people around us, we think that that's secure. It doesn't mean anything. How do you become secure within yourself? To where if and when, ish hits the fan or that person leaves or that job fires you, like how do we start creating these dynamics of, being sustained within ourselves? That, if they're here, fine, great. But if they're not, we're not in disarray, completely. So, that's what I have for you today. I'm Mokmazel. Please go watch this. Please go watch the video by Mel Robbins that I suggested. Go pick up some of Dr. Russell Kennedy's techniques on dealing with anxiety if you are dealing with anxiety. And yeah, it's time to get free, y'all. It's time. I'm Mocha Mazel, signing off. Peace, love, and blessings to you all. Bye.